A high-ranking member of Russia's National Security Council today said Russia must remove Satanists from Ukrainian leadership posts. Even more shocking, as evidence that we are quickly approaching the end of the age of mankind. The head of the Russian Orthodox Church anointed Vladimir Putin as the church's chief exorcist to cast out the devil from Ukraine. Unbelievable. Let's start with the call to remove Satanists from Ukrainian leadership posts.
So we've gone from denazification to de-Satanization now.
Yeah, that was one of the first news stories I saw this morning, and I knew this was not going to be a normal Thursday. Doc, I've been sitting in this position for almost 24 years. 1999 is when we started the show. Never have I seen a headline, and we have several here. I've never seen headlines like this that are screaming, the end of the age of mankind is upon us. Repent, Christ is coming.
Yes, and coming from no less than Russia. Coming from Russia.
Yeah, this is amazing. So the first one, the version that we're going to put up, this is not the first one I saw this morning, but this one is from CNBC. They picked it up later today. Putin says risk of world conflict is high. See, on a normal day, Doc, that would be a big story.
Just right there, that headline by itself.
Because he's saying the risk of nuclear war is high. But it's the second part of that headline. Moscow official calls for de-Satanization in Ukraine.
Okay, so let's dive right into this because obviously that catches our attention. Russian President Vladimir Putin said his government was aware of plans by Ukraine to use a dirty bomb. We've been reporting on this for several days, a claim that's already been made by several Kremlin officials without evidence since the start of the week. The Russian president, in a meeting with intelligence directors from several ex-Soviet countries, said that the risk of conflict in the world and in the region was high and that security needed to be increased around its critical infrastructure. Now, that's the first part of the headline. The second part of the headline is here. A member of Russia's Security Council is calling for a new mission of de-Satanization in Ukraine after months of basing Moscow's invasion on the need to denazify the country. In a letter, Russian Security Council Assistant Secretary Alexei Pavlov argued that this was increasingly urgent as there are, he claimed, hundreds of sects operating in the country. He said, I believe that with the continuation of the special military operation, it becomes more and more urgent to carry out the de-Satanization of Ukraine, or as the head of the Chechen Republic, Ramzan Kadyrov, aptly put it, it's complete de-Satanization, he said. Now, Pavlov claimed that the Church of Satan is spread across Ukraine, adding that it is one of the religions officially registered in the United States. All the Satanism finds a lively response and support from the official Ukrainian authorities, he added, without citing evidence. Well, Rick, so 22, 23 years of doing True News and the legacy programs leading up to True News, could you have ever imagined a headline like this or comments like this from Russia?
Not from any country. I can't imagine this from any country, let alone from Russia. It really underscores how close we are to the end of the age.
Right.
That the headlines of the world's newspapers and television news networks are screaming at 7 billion humans. The end of the age of mankind is upon you. There's no excuse for you to be ignorant about the times. It's in front of you.
Right. You
have to deliberately ignore these headlines. I showed this today. I was at an auto dealership this morning, and I showed my phone. I had it on my phone. I showed it to one of the employees I was talking to, and he must have been a church member because the look on his face, Doc, he just looked at my phone and looked up at me, And I said, yeah, that's a real story. Russia says they have to de-Satanize Ukraine. And then he began to open up, talking about how close we are, to the end of the world.
Right.
This is what we need to be doing as Christians. The news is it's our best witnessing tool right now.
Because it's happening all around us.
Just use your phone and open up the headlines and show it to your unsaved friends or whoever you meet and say, look at this. What do you think this means? And you can begin a conversation with anybody about the end of the world, the second coming of Christ, the manifestation of the kingdom of God. It is upon us. And so what is so stunning here is, Doc, this did not come from a minister, church official.
No, and didn't come from a talk show host or anything like that.
It came from what is the deputy?
He's on their security council.
Yes.
Alexei Pavlov.
Yes. I thought I read that he was a deputy.
Assistant secretary.
Yeah. Yes. So high-level official on the National Security Council of Russia.
Right. And he's not alone in that. There have been several now that have come out. And you mentioned here, one of those is Patriarch Kirill. And so, and we have this was a Newsweek article today. President Putin named chief exorcist. Now they have a different take on the headline.
Let's get back and look at that headline.
Yeah.
You just got to stare at this for a moment.
Right. So Putin appointed chief exorcist as Kremlin whips up satanic panic.
So Newsweek's got to put a spin on it.
Right.
That the Kremlin is whipping up satanic panic. Like this is some KGB propaganda campaign by that wily old KGB agent Vladimir Putin.
Right.
If you can't beat the West with with your weapons, then whip up satanic fear and tell the world that you're fighting Satan. Now see, Newsweek's missing it. Spiritually, they're blind. The people, the editors over at Newsweek are blind. They're spiritually blind. The headline is telling them something big is happening in the world.
Right.
Yes, Newsweek published it, but they had to put a spin on it.
Yes, they had to do their own propaganda on it. So, now whether or not you believe Vladimir Putin in all this, that's beside the point. We're just reporting what the Russians are saying right now. So Russian President Vladimir Putin has been named chief exorcist by the head of the country's Orthodox Church as the Kremlin seeks to redefine the goals of its invasion of Ukraine. President Putin, when he invaded the neighboring country in February, used the term denazification, saying that was the goal of his so-called special military operation. But now his Security Council is shifting to the phrase de-Satanization. So on Tuesday, Patriarch Kirill, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, called Putin a fighter against the Antichrist, or chief exorcist, according to local news outlets. Kirill said that Mr. Putin is fighting against the manifestation of globalism, and the name of the one who will claim global power will be associated with the end of the world. Patriarch Kirill told Russian citizens not to be afraid of death amid Putin's decision to mobilize reserve troops to fight in Ukraine.
Whoa. There is so much in that one paragraph, Doc. Let's work our way through it. Patriarch Kirill who's the head of the Orthodox Church.
The equivalent to the Pope.
Yes.
For the Orthodox Church.
He called Putin the fighter against the Antichrist. Can you think of anybody in the world that a church leader has said, that man is anointed by God to oppose and make war against the Antichrist? Can you think of anybody, Doc?
No. Nobody in the world. I can't think of anyone in history off the top of my head.
And you're right, in world history. Joe Biden is Roman Catholic in name, not by practice, but by name. What if the headline today said, Pope Francis called Joe Biden the fighter against the Antichrist and the world's chief exorcist.
I mean, that would be headline news. That would be, it would be earth-shattering, that kind of announcement, that kind of proclamation from the Pope.
Well, the Russian, they don't call him Pope. They're against the papacy. People don't realize that. The Russian Orthodox Church is against the papacy. They don't allow the Pope to visit Russia. I don't like using that term Pope, but I'm trying to help people understand the level of authority that he has in the Russian Orthodox Church.
Right.
The highest ecclesiastical figure in the Russian Church. And he said today that Putin is the one called by God to fight the Antichrist. He basically anointed Putin to take on the Antichrist, the beast. Well, where is the beast centered? They are implying that the United States and Western Europe is the beast.
Right.
That we are the Antichrist system. And I wouldn't argue with them.
Because it sure acts like it, doesn't it?
It looks like it, smells like it, talks like it. It's evil. Who can make war against the beast? The Bible asks. Well, who can make war against NATO?
Well, Patriarch Kirill mentioned globalism in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in the manifestation of the one who will claim global power. And isn't that the end goal here, to claim global power at some point?
He knows that the son of perdition is coming. He knows it. The son of perdition is coming. This means, Doc, that at the highest levels of the Russian political and military leadership, they are having discussions with Patriarch Kirill and other church leaders about the end of the world.
Now, just to kind of give it a frame of reference here, imagine if our own National Security Council, you know, the heads of the various military branches and Homeland Security, everybody that's involved, imagine they're in D.C. and they're saying, we have to fight the devil.
Mm-hmm. And we're not fighting a country, we're fighting Satan.
I mean, just to put that in the frame of reference, those are the levels of conversations that they're having in Russia right now at their National Security Council.
So what is America doing that makes the Russian leaders think that we're the devil?
We're doing devil things.
You got it. We're doing devil things. We're doing hellish things. Our behavior, our values, everything about our society, entertainment, education, business, it's demonic, it's satanic. And for those who are watching me because you hate me and you're watching me to find something against me to use against me, you're of the devil yourself. Plain and simple.
But you're fulfilling Scripture too, because the Bible says in the last days, scoffers, mockers
That's right.
will come. So you're fulfilling Bible prophecy.
But
right there.
what these people have to understand, these people who, and not just me, there's others that they want to trip up, they want to mock and attack. That group of people, they have a mindset, Doc. They share a mindset. They mock Christ. They mock morality. They promote immorality. They are slaves to their sexuality.
Yeah, that's it.
They're hedonists. They're pagans. They will utterly fight to the end for the right to murder babies before they're born.
And then after they're born, mutilate them.
Subject them to sexual perversion by drag queens in public schools and libraries. Everything that they fight for, everything that they believe is demonic. They are part of the beast system. And Putin is looking at America and the West and saying, whatever has taken over that country, it's demonic.
And we have to fight it.
And we have to fight it because they're trying to take over the world and make the whole world think like them. They know it. Look, NATO is using its power. The United States of America is using its clout and its power to force other nations to submit to sexual perversion.
You're right.
We put homosexual flags on our embassies around the world.
And a flag represents your allegiance.
Yes, your
so
kingdom.
We salute the LGBTQ nation. That's
no, sodomy.
Yes.
All right, the rest of the world knows it as sodomy. And America salutes it. America offends other nations by flying a sodomite flag on its embassies on their soil. They see us as evil. Most of them are afraid to say it. The Russians, something's happened in just recent weeks. The Russians have come to the place of saying, let's just say it. Let's just say it. We're fighting the devil. Let's get real. We're not fighting NATO. We're fighting the devil. We're fighting the Antichrist system. And they're saying it now. But you know what else? They're calling on God. They're calling on God to help them, to empower them. They're calling on the name of Jesus Christ to defend them and to fight for them. That's not happening in America because America is against Jesus Christ.
You said it, Rick. We are. Because we were for Christ, we'd live for Christ, right?
If we were living for Christ, we would be in unity with the Russians.
And we'd be fighting the Antichrist too, right?
That's right.
So somebody's right and somebody's wrong in this battle.
Yeah.
But now it's become a battle for the Russians against Satan himself,
That's
against the Antichrist.
So, Doc, look at this statement. It goes on. Patriarch Kirill told the Russian people not to be afraid to die.
Yes. And this is the second time he's done that in recent weeks. He had a sermon on the last Sunday in September, and he said the same thing there too. He said, don't be afraid to die for Russia, because this is a holy war, basically. But so this is the second time that he's brought this up.
So Pope Francis said to all the Catholics, we're entering into combat with the Antichrist. Don't be afraid to die. What impact would that have on Catholics?
There'd be a certain segment of Catholics that would fight to the death.
Yes.
And so,
yes.
And you've got to know that's the same kind of response that they're having in Russia
Yes.
right now.
So the spiritual leader of Russia is telling the rank and file church members, we may have to die to stop this satanic United States of America. He's preparing them. He's preparing them for nuclear war.
Yes.
He's saying, America is so wicked, we may have to die so that this evil force is stopped. That's what he's doing, Doc. This is stunning. It's absolutely mind-boggling. And
Alexei Pavlov didn't stop there.
No, he kept talking.
Yes.
He's going to be in trouble now.
Right. So this is from Jerusalem Post. Look at this headline here. Senior Russian official, CHABAD LUBAVITCH is a neo-pagan cult. Now, who is this senior Russian official? It's Alexei Pavlov, who we were just talking about here, the Assistant Secretary on the National Security Council in Russia. He directly accuses CHABAD LUBAVITCH of being basically a cult operating in Russia.
Because he knows that they practice Kabbalah.
Right.
And it's witchcraft.
Now, we're going to read these quotes here and see if you spot the connection that he's making from his previous statements. Alexei Pavlov, the Assistant Secretary of the Security Council of Russia, has written in an op-ed that he believes neo-pagan cults have gained strength in Ukraine, naming one of them as the CHABAD LUBAVITCH Hasidic movement. The main life principle of the Lubavitcher followers is the supremacy of the sect supporters over all nations and peoples, Pavlov said.
In other words, Zionism will rule the world.
Right. That's the goal.
That's what he's saying.
Yes.
So he's getting very close to saying that Zionism is an integral part of Satanism and the beast system at the end of the world.
And he seems to move even closer to that in the next statement here. He offered an example and said that Jewish Ukrainian oligarch Igor Kolomoisky is a Lubavitcher Hasid, an adherent of the ultra-Orthodox religious movement. He added that a number of other Ukrainian oligarchs belong to this movement, in particular Viktor Penchuk, who is the son-in-law of the second president of Ukraine, Leonid Kuchma. Russia's chief rabbi, Beryl Lazar, strongly condemned Pavlov's statements and condemned them as vulgar anti-Semitism. Lazar wrote to Pavlov in response to his remarks, saying, "Unfortunately, the article contains a position that is difficult to grasp, other than an insult to millions of Jewish believers, including the vast majority of Jews in Russia. Pavlov's logic can be called nonsense, vulgar, and anti-Semitism, but this is a new type of old blood libel. And if they are uttered by a member of the Russian Security Council, this poses a huge danger for Jews," Lazar stressed. Well, he's making the direct connection between the Chabad Lubavitch movement that's operating in Russia and globally, and I'm saying Satanism. He's making the direct connection, right?
Yes, he is, Doc.
Because he said in his previous statement, these sects are scattered all over Ukraine. And then he makes the direct connection in that same op-ed saying, and Chabad Lubavitch is one of these examples here.
Yes. And again, he knows that they're spreading Kabbalah witchcraft throughout Ukraine, and that they're involved in a lot of other satanic activities, and they're calling it out, Doc. Now, he is going to get the same treatment that Kanye West got. He's going to be deplatformed by the West. I suspect now that the worldwide Zionist movement is going to go into full war mode against Russia.
Yes.
Now you're going to see a call to destroy Russia because he's called it out. He named it. They're very close to just saying, look, the Zionists are running this war, and they want to destroy Christian Russia. He's about that far away from saying it.
Well, he certainly put all the puzzle pieces on the table for you.
Yes.
And said, oh, great, here, figure it out. This is what the issue is, without having to say it.
I think you're going to see Israel swing over to being actively involved in the war, which will pit them against Russia.
Right.
You're going to see wealthy Jews in America and Europe really openly calling for the use of whatever weapons the West must use to take down Russia. I mean, we know where they're going with it, but they're going to whip up the hate Russia fever. It's really going to get ramped up now because the Russian officials are linking Zionism with Satanism, and they'll have to answer it. You know that, Doc. They don't let anybody alone. No. Once you draw the connections, they have to come after you.
And they execute you, either socially or in the media or any other way, even up to the point of actual execution of their enemies. And so,
they're going to demand the West use nuclear weapons against Russia. Doc, I've been saying for years, I can't figure out the source of the Western world's hatred of Russia. I can only come up with one answer, that the ruling shadow government of America and Western Europe is Jewish, and that they despise Russia for casting off Zionist communism.
Yes.
And getting free from it. And America's ruling class has been determined they're going to get even with the Russians. That the Russian people were under their thumbs since 1917.
The Bolsheviks.
Okay?
So,
America is now under their thumbs.
yes, the new Bolshevism.
Yes. We're living under a new Bolshevik revolution here in America. That's why life is miserable. That's why everything's been destroyed. Because that's what they did to Russian culture. And then the Russians in the early 90s cast them out and started to rebuild their country. And what did they do? They went back to church.
That's right.
And so now the satanic West hates them for it. And they're calling them out today. Look, it's really time for Christians in every country to come to the aid of the Russians. It really is.
Yeah, you're going to cause hair to raise up on a lot of people's necks right there with that statement. You know
I
that,
don't
right?
care. I don't care. I don't care. It is time for Christians in every nation to come to the defense of the Russians. The Russians are good people. They're standing against the godlessness of the United States of America. And we are godless. And they're standing against us. They are opposing us. They're opposing our godlessness. They're opposing our wickedness. And they're not trying to do anything against us. They just want to be left alone.
Right.
But the West will not leave them alone.
No.
And so they're fighting. They're fighting because they know their survival depends on it.
And it does. I mean, it's their continuation as a nation depends on them fighting right now.
But the majority of the American evangelical church world in this country is defending Zelensky and the Nazis in the Ukrainian army. That's a fact. The American evangelicals are on the side of Zelensky
and the Nazis.
The vulgar, foul-mouthed, obscene comedian, Zelensky. And the Nazis, real Nazis that are in the Ukrainian army. The American Evangelical Church is bankrupt. They're totally bankrupt, Doc. They have nothing in heaven. Their account is empty. Their account is empty. There's no favor. There's nothing. They've deserted Christ. They've turned their back on Christ. They sold their souls to the Zionists decades ago. And they will not stand for Jesus Christ for anything, for any reason. And they turn against the Christians who do stand with Christ.
Right.
They betray them. So the evangelical church world is salt that has lost its savor. And Jesus said when salt loses its savor, it's good for nothing. It's useless.
Except to be trodden upon.
Throw it out into the street and let the horses walk on it and urinate on it and defecate on it. That's what he said it's worth. And so that's where the American Evangelical Church is at today. It has become useless to God. It's sad. It is sad. Doc, you know, we didn't bring it up for today, but I saw a Barna research poll several days ago, and I sent it to Doc one evening, and I said, look at this, Doc. The American Evangelical Church leaders who were questioned about how they were going to vote, or what were the topics, what were the campaign issues that were motivating them. It wasn't America's immorality. No. It wasn't, they're putting drag queens in elementary schools. It wasn't abortion. But none of those topics. It was inflation, cost of living. All of it was economic issues.
Yes.
These are the evangelicals who were questioned. And the pollsters were surprised that moral issues were down at the bottom.
Right. They started coming in like at 5th and 6th before they started showing up.
Yeah, well, anyhow.
So, just like the world. It's just like the world.
That's right. Well, Doc, this is not the first time a high-level Russian official has gotten in trouble by talking about the Zionist influence in Ukraine.
No.
Back in May, Sergei Lavrov provoked outrage in Israel and other parts of the Jewish community around the world when he said, well, basically, for all we know, Hitler could have been part Jewish.
That's right. So you may recall this article. We covered this. Israel has reacted with fury after Russia's foreign minister claimed that Nazi leader Adolf Hitler had Jewish blood. Sergei Lavrov made the comments to try to justify Russia's portrayal of Ukraine as Nazi, despite the fact that its president is Jewish. Mr. Lavrov made the remarks in an interview on an Italian TV program Zona Bianca days after Israel marked Holocaust Remembrance Day, one of the most solemn occasions in the Israeli calendar. Now, when asked how Russia can claim that it is fighting to denazify Ukraine when President Vladimir Zelensky is himself Jewish, Mr. Lavrov said, I could be wrong, but Hitler also had Jewish blood. That Zelensky is Jewish means absolutely nothing. Wise Jewish people say that the most ardent anti-Semites are usually Jews. That's coming from the Russian foreign minister.
Right, because he knows his World War II history, and he knows that the Zionists at that time were in a secret pact with Hitler.
That's right, Rick.
Read the transfer agreements. It's documented. Hitler's Third Reich was sending millions of German marks, equivalent to millions of US dollars, to the Zionists who had infiltrated Palestine. Yes. There was no Israel. There was no Jewish state of Israel in World War II. He was sending millions of dollars to the Zionists from Europe who had infiltrated Palestine to set up their Zionist state. And he was financing it.
Right.
Adolf Hitler was financing the early Zionist revolution in Palestine. That's a fact. And whenever you say it, they come after you.
Right.
Because that's a truth they don't want anybody to know about. Including they don't want most Jews to know about it. Because most Jews don't know this is the history of the Zionists. You have to separate the Zionists from just everyday average Jewish person. Zionism is a movement. It's a worldwide political, I believe, satanic movement. I believe Zionism is satanic.
Well, it's inspired by Theodore Herzl, basically an atheist. I mean,
he wasn't basically, he was an atheist, you know, and a friend of
Madame Blavatsky and that crowd.
Yeah, you know, the early communists. He was part of the early communist movement. Israel is a socialist state. If you go to the airport in Tel Aviv, you'll see on the airport wall a mural of the clenched fist, the Soviet fist.
Yes.
I mean,
it's right there, right out in the open.
Yeah.
So for everybody to see.
They really don't hide it.
But for the Russian foreign minister to say it at this level, and once again, this was back in May. Rick, there's something new that's happening here with Russia now, isn't there?
There is.
There's a kind of a new boldness, a new, you know, kind of the attitude, what do we have to lose at this point?
They're just saying, let's say it. Let's come right out in the open and say it. Let's just name it and tell the whole world who and what we're fighting. And folks, we're, those of us living in the USA, in World War III, we're on the wrong side. It's as simple as that. Okay? If you were a Christian living in Germany, you were on the wrong side. You were a Christian, you're still saved.
Yes.
But politically, you're in the wrong place. because Germany had been taken over by the Nazis.
And
now America has been taken over by the Nazis.
And Germany was controlled by the Nazis. People were still going to church every Sunday, Rick. The church bells were ringing, calling people to church, and yet they were, many were silent. So not everyone, but many were.
What happened, Doc, the churches of Germany, some of them, many of them, succumbed to the Nazi takeover.
Yes.
And they would actually hang swastikas
in the churches.
Inside the church, outside the church. Not to say, hey, we're Nazis. It was a way of saying to the Nazis, you don't have to fear us. We're cowards. We won't fight.
Well, it's sort of like how we put gay pride flags in front of our churches now.
Yeah, because they want the homosexuals, the sodomites, to say, leave them alone. They're not going to stand for Christ.
Right.
They're not going to stand for righteousness.
Yeah, that's their flag of surrender there.
Yes, flag of surrender. But there was the confessing churches. And they were called the confessing churches because they confessed Jesus Christ. And they refused to bow down to Hitler and Nazism. And the leader of the confessing churches was Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who lost his life 1 month before the war ended. He was, they put a piano wire around his neck and hung him. And none of the religious leaders of Germany tried to save his life. They were afraid. They let the Nazis execute him. Yet they knew he was a righteous man. The church leaders, they knew he was a righteous man. They knew he was saying the right thing. And yet they were afraid to try to rescue Bonhoeffer. So they allowed the Nazis to kill him. What does that say about human nature? They hid. Just like the disciples hid.
Yes. When
the Romans carried off Christ to the trial, all right, the disciples hid. They ran. Okay, they did the same thing to Bonhoeffer. When the Nazis took him away, nobody came to his rescue. And the same thing will happen in America.
You're right.
If you stand for righteousness, if you take a bold stand for Jesus Christ, most of the church world will desert you, even though they know you're right. They're too afraid to oppose the evil. That's something they're going to have to deal with on Judgment Day. Let's get back to World War III. So, number 15, this is Novosti News Service. Putin said that the United States is using Ukraine as a battering ram against Russia.
Yes, that's right, Rick. Ukraine has become an instrument of U.S. foreign policy, Russian President Vladimir Putin said, addressing the heads of delegations at a meeting of the Council of Heads of Security Agencies and Intelligence Services of the CIS countries. What they are trying to achieve, those who do it, the West, we can see on the example of Ukraine, which has become an instrument of American foreign policy. The country has practically lost sovereignty and is directly controlled by the United States, Mr. Putin said. Now, the Russian leader pointed out that the U.S. and its allies do not stop trying to arrange color revolutions, inciting extremist and nationalist sentiments. These actions directly threaten all CIS countries, Mr. Putin stressed. According to the president, the United States is using Ukraine as a battering ram against Russia, against our union state with the Republic of Belarus, and against the CSTO and the CIS as a whole. Now, he added that the West was operating in the former Soviet Republic for its own military purposes. He said Ukrainian territory has been turned into a testing ground for military biological experiments and now is being pumped up with weapons, including heavy weapons, and the desire of the Kiev regime to acquire nuclear weapons is not disregarded, Mr. Putin explained.
So he's now bringing into the discussion the biolabs that the U.S. built in Ukraine. Which again, Doc, the conservatives in America, the patriots and so forth, they would, if you told them about secret bio research labs, they would condemn it. That's the New World Order. That's horrible. We know what they're going to do with it. And yet, many of them are supporting the war against Russia, which means that they're supporting the people who built the biolabs.
Right.
Why?
That's the problem you have when you attach your faith to the wagon of politics.
Yes, that's right.
That you're in for the ride then.
That's right.
So, because that's where it takes you. It takes you to situations like this.
But Christian nationalism is a very dangerous thing. There is such a thing as Christian nationalism.
Yes.
I've come to the awareness of it, that a lot of stuff that's happening out there in the so-called right is nationalism, where they're wrapping the American flag around the cross and trying to justify a lot of things by saying, well, as Christians we have to support it. No, you do not. Your allegiance is to the kingdom. You are a citizen of the kingdom. In this earth we are pilgrims.
Yes. We're passing
through. We're on our way to New Jerusalem. Our home is New Jerusalem. Our King is Jesus. And we have to be vigilant not to allow people to wrap national flags around the Christian cross and say, our cause is just. Because what's happening in America is we have Christians who are defending evil simply because somebody has told them this is the conservative thing to do. This is the patriotic thing to do. No, you have to use your discernment and your judgment and decide, is that righteous? Is that holy? Is that Christian? Or is there another motive in this? And again, the Christians have lost their influence because they've given up. They've given up their devotion to the kingdom of God. They're more interested in about saving America than saving souls.
Right.
There's a big difference. Saving America and saving souls are two different things. If you save enough souls, you don't have to worry about the country. The country will take care of itself.
Whereas if all your goal is to save America, you might just lose it all.
And that's where we're at right now. Well, we're going to take you one more step and show you how serious this situation is. Here's another Novosti News Service. Russian strategic missile forces practice a massive retaliatory nuclear strike.
Yes. So they've got their nuclear response drills going on this week. And so this is, very clear. But listen to this article here from Novosti. The Strategic Deterrence Forces practice a response to a nuclear attack against Russia during the exercises, Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said. The maneuvers were led by President Vladimir Putin. And this was the report that Mr. Shoigu gave to Mr. Putin. Comrade Supreme Commander-in-Chief, in accordance with the training plan for the armed forces of the Russian Federation, under your leadership, training is being conducted to control the armed forces of the Russian Federation, during which the task of delivering a massive nuclear strike by strategic offensive forces in response to an enemy nuclear strike will be worked out. And that's Mr. Shoigu addressing that to Mr. Putin. So they're making it very clear, and they're sending a message not only to the armed forces of Russia, what they're preparing for, but also to us here in the West. They're making it very clear. We are preparing to respond to any attempt at a nuclear strike here on the homeland of Russia.
So, do you remember yesterday's program, the New York Times article? At the bottom of that article, there's an unnamed senior U.S. official who told the New York Times, we have detected unusual activity with the Russian nuclear forces. And we were talking about this yesterday, Doc. What is the unusual activity? If this is true, what is it? My view is they're going on to combat readiness. They are at full alert and prepared for NATO to do something against Russia. And what they told us today is that they will carry out a massive nuclear retaliatory strike. Massive doesn't mean we will hit one target and give you an option to back down.
Right.
Massive means you will not wake up. There will not be anything left of your country. We will empty our closets and our garages of every warhead that we have. It'll be massive. You won't exist anymore. That's what I hear out of this story, Doc. Another one, Newsweek. I wonder why the Russians are nervous. Look at the headline. If you were in Russia, what would you think about this headline?
Right. This is Newsweek today, folks. American troops prepared to engage not in a conflict, not in protection of Ukraine, but in war with Russia. And an American carrier standing by to lead the charge. So this is the headlines that the Russians are seeing now as well.
So they're preparing for a massive nuclear retaliatory strike. Because they're looking at Newsweek and saying, hey, their own newspapers and magazines and websites are telling us the United States is training, getting ready for a war with Russia. This next one, Doc, is a segment from an interview on CNN, Christine Amanpour, and she interviewed the Russian ambassador to the United States.
Right, Andrei Kellen.
Okay.
So,
and she asked him about, you know, would Putin use nukes against us? Is Putin going to use nukes in Ukraine? And this is what the ambassador said.
Both the governments of Britain, France, and of the United States have sent a démarche to the Kremlin, telling them to quit these allegations about Ukraine using a dirty bomb or planning a dirty bomb. What is your reaction to that? Because there's no evidence about it. You know, last March, Russia accused Ukraine of planning a weapons of mass destruction, you know, chemical, biological. That never came to anything.
Look, what really has happened is that Minister of Defense Shoigu has made telephone calls not only to three ministers you mentioned, but also to Minister of Defense of India, Turkey, and China. We have information. This is very serious information that something is under preparation. Might be a dirty bomb. So we are just passing this information, and we have offered also professional conversation on that side. Some ministers has reacted positively. Some, like UK, has said, just from the outset, this is lie. This is not a good approach, I will say.
Well, it's, you know, they have intelligence that they're referring to, but also, as you know, Ukraine has asked the IAEA, the internationally and Russia-supported UN arm to look at any of these issues. The IAEA chief said this Monday that the IAEA inspected one of these locations that you're talking about a month ago, and all our findings were consistent with Ukraine's safeguard declarations. No undeclared nuclear activities or material were found there, and they're going back to check again in the next...
Now, to these two locations, one is in Kiev, this is an institution which is doing, the other is in yellow waters, as they say. So the checking will be the best outcome of it.
So will you take their word for it if they check? And they say, the IAEA says this is not true, will Russia stop making these allegations?
Well, IAEA is supposed to check, and it is going to provide an answer some months after that. Yeah, it's a bit too long.
The question, Ambassador, really, I mean, you're a rational man. Why would a country want to create a dirty bomb, radioactive disaster in their own country? Why would a country, you know, do what you accused it of doing back in March? A chemical or a biological weapon. Why would it do that?
I understand your question. We have a feeling that at this moment, authorities in Kiev need to attract attention by something. Because actually the offensive attack on different fronts, counterattack, as they are calling it, it has stopped. They are now losing all resources. The front line has stabilized in all three places. I mean in Kherson, in the east, and in Zaporozhye. There is no movement, and this country has no more resources. At the moment, it needs something like probably the dam in Kakhovka, which is it's a difficult place, because if it will be damaged, then we shall have a flood over there, or perhaps something else. So our people, they're serious people. If intelligence is saying that something is in preparation, then they are right about this. So the issue is to verify. If it is not over there, so we will simply be happy.
You know that the West and Ukraine believe that this is a Russian false flag, and the West is very concerned that you are making these allegations as a cover for some kind of escalation on your side, and you say that the Ukrainian battlefield is now stabilized, in your words, and not moving, but the Russians also face a lot of pushback, and the West says the Russian military operation is not going as well. Is Russia trying to escalate this war?
First of all, in his conversation, the Minister of Defense Shoigu, he assured every minister once again that we are not going to use nuclear weapon. And there was no single statement, neither by the president or responsible guys. I do not take journalists, of course, and all these talks on the television. So Russia is not going to use nukes. So it is out of the question. Second is that for about a month and a half already, Ukraine offensive has stopped. Nothing is happening.
Okay,
in this
you
area.
said that. I don't want to have you repeat yourself, but this is really important what you've just told me, that Russia will not use nuclear weapons. Now, tomorrow, in a month, in a year, no matter what happens.
I cannot say about next
in your conventional
generation.
scenario,
Yeah.
are you saying that your country
Yeah.
has pledged,
Yes.
your defense minister,
Yes.
not to use nuclear weapons?
Yes, yes. This is what I'm saying, and this is what has been said by defense minister, by our president, and all of that. So,
And your president has said that too?
he never mentioned a possibility of using
No, but he
it.
has. You know,
there are speculations.
he's raised veiled threats, and it's worried
No.
everybody.
No, there are speculations and allegations and issues that are trying to be, which he has never pronounced, in fact.
As you know, President Putin has made veiled threats. Now, the West has seen no movement in Russia's nuclear posture, but again, you're saying it is off the table.
Yes, I am saying that.
Okay.
Okay, is it okay?
Oh, yeah, it's okay. I mean, I just want to be really clear about this, because it is the most important thing that we need to know at this moment. As you know, many world leaders have called it absolutely irresponsible for Russia even to have ever mentioned it. So it's really, really important to hear what you're saying.
Poor Christine. She doesn't get the fact that when Putin has alluded to the use of nukes, he wasn't talking about hitting Ukraine.
Right.
He was talking about hitting the West.
The operating centers.
The decision-making centers. She doesn't get it. And she also said, why would any country set off a dirty bomb inside their own country? Well, CNN told the world that Russia blew up its pipeline.
Why would a country blow up its own pipeline? What's the logic in that?
But CNN told the world that Russia did it. They could see the logic then. They can't see the logic now. But anyhow, he was the ambassador. And so what he said was there is no current plan by Russia to use nukes in Ukraine. And I believe that. But I also believe that when they talk about the use of their strategic nuclear forces, they're planning to take out Western cities.
I think you're right, Rick.
Right? And apparently she doesn't get that. I don't think she grasps what they're talking, because Americans and Westerners cannot comprehend that somebody would dare to wipe them out and they would cease to exist. We're going to go back to Newsweek. This first one, DACA, the State Department.
Yeah, actually, this is a response by the State Department to the remarks that the ambassador made. And I thought it would be appropriate to hear what they had to say, because, and I'll ask you a question about it afterwards, but this is Assistant State Department spokesperson Vedant Patel, and basically saying, in spite of all this talk about nuclear bombs going off, our nuclear posture has not changed. So let's watch this.
And then just a follow-up, the Russian ambassador to the UK said today to CNN that Russia is not going to use nukes. Is there any reason to take what Russian officials are saying on this front at face value, just given what they have said, of course, leading up to the Russian invasion of Ukraine?
Look, firstly, and Ned spoke to this earlier in the week as well, we have no reason to adjust our own nuclear posture, nor do we have any indications that Russia is preparing to use a nuclear weapon. What this is about is the irresponsible rhetoric and the irresponsible tactics that the Russian Federation is taking part in to talk about this. It is another trend in their long line of saying that another country is going to do something, and then they themselves are ones to carry out that action. And so it's this kind of irresponsible rhetoric that continues to be deeply troubling. Right, but should a Russian official's denial that they would use nuclear weapons be taken as legitimate? Again, I am just going to reiterate what I said, that we have not seen any reason to adjust our nuclear posture, nor do we have any indications that Russia is preparing to use a nuclear weapon. But the rhetoric that we're seeing from across the Kremlin and across the Russian Federation on this is deeply irresponsible.
26, 27 years old?
It looks like you just got out of junior high. And so, but Rick, the question I have for you is this. I'm of the belief that there was an actual plan by the Ukrainians to use a dirty bomb.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I don't think it was the Russians is because our nuclear posture would have changed, wouldn't it? Wouldn't our nuclear posture have changed if we legitimately believed that Russia was planning to use a dirty bomb? I mean, my posture would certainly change if that was the case.
And what did he say was the position of the U.S. about Russia's willingness to use nukes?
You heard our own Assistant State Department spokesperson say, we have no evidence that Russia has any intention of using nuclear weapons.
Then why does Joe Biden and other people keep talking about it? Because they're fanning this hatred of Russia.
Right.
And trying to get the people angry. I think they were trying to get the public, they were prepping the public for a dirty bomb.
Yes.
And now, it's like the fake chemical attacks in Syria.
Absolutely right, yes.
They've been called out and called off. They've been outed, and so they called it off.
And so now they're spinning all this, and and saying, well, the Russians, you know, they have no evidence of any kind of dirty bomb or anything like that. They're just deferring their own actions, and yet at the same time, we don't change our nuclear posture.
Right.
I mean, if we're saying that, you know, it's not the Ukrainians but the Russians that are going to set off a dirty bomb, I would go to, you know, the next level, DEFCON.
Yeah.
So
it's a good point.
So.
I got another Newsweek. Boy, I'm doing a lot of Newsweek here today. Russia's envoy warns disastrous consequences if U.S. troops enter Ukraine. And this is based on comments by senior U.S. military officers deployed to NATO's front lines.
So as senior U.S. military officers deployed to NATO's front line with war-torn Ukraine, warned they were prepared to join the fight against Russia if called upon. Russia's ambassador to the United States told Newsweek that such a move would bring about catastrophic ramifications. In a CBS News report published Friday, commanders of the U.S. Army 101st Airborne Division stationed just miles from the Romanian border with Ukraine were cited as saying they were ready to cross over in response to any escalation or attack on NATO. And hours after that report emerged, National Security Council Strategic Communications Coordinator John Kirby emphasized that nothing has changed about the Commander-in-Chief's decision that there will be no American troops fighting inside Ukraine. But the comments also made their way to Moscow and its embassy in Washington, where Ambassador Anatoly Antonov told Newsweek that we have already officially pointed out to high-ranking members of the U.S. government that such bravura statements by the U.S. Army commanders are inadmissible. We are not going to tolerate a situation where military threats are mounting on Russian borders. Direct participation of the U.S. military in the fighting will lead to disastrous consequences. I'm convinced that further aggravation of the situation is not in Washington's best interest.
So, Doc, last Friday, why were American soldiers in Europe preparing to enter the fight against Russia?
And being public about it.
Yes,
And
because a false flag was coming.
Yes.
And they were revved up and ready to go, and they knew the false flag was coming.
And the only option Russia had was to out the false flag.
Yes.
And call all these different defense coordinators, defense ministers in Europe and the U.S. and say, we're not saying you guys did it, but Ukraine is threatening to use a dirty bomb. And you should really look into it.
And so the response of the U.S. and Great Britain was,
you're crazy.
Russia, you stop talking like that. We're not going to listen to this stuff anymore. But knowing they get caught at it.
Right. But you got to know also that some of these other defense ministers that they contacted, contacted close to a dozen, you're dropping seeds of doubt in their mind about what's going on. And so,
hey, a couple more on the war, and then I want to switch over to politics before we close it up today. I found this one. This was from a Lithuanian news site, but the article we're going to show you is actually Ukrainian, but they got it from a Lithuanian site. Front News is Ukrainian. The commander of the Lithuanian Armed Forces opposes the transfers of howitzers and air defense systems to Ukraine. The possibilities are exhausted. And so when you read this, what you find out is that the commander is saying, we don't have enough. We don't have enough weapons to defend our own country to be giving them away to Ukraine. Ukraine needs to get their own weapons. Let's read one or two paragraphs here. This is very interesting.
So the commander of the armed forces of Lithuania, Vladimiras Rupšys, said at the next meeting of the State Defense Council of the country, he will propose not to transfer PZH 2000 self-propelled howitzers and NASAMS air defense systems to Ukraine. I have to have the tools. We can't do the job without the appropriate capabilities. But the capabilities we have are at the point where we can no longer give. General Rupšys told reporters at the Pabrada training ground on Wednesday. He said, we must understand that we also have obligations to NATO. We have clearly stated what units we provide to NATO. These must be units capable of conducting untargeted fire or field artillery, maneuverable units with firepower, as well as air defense equipment to provide support as a host country, General Rupšys said.
Now, let's take the next article. And this is the London Guardian. This is the new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, the first Hindu Prime Minister of Great Britain, who happens to be richer than King Charles.
Right, his wife's a billionaire. So,
but he said there are difficult decisions to come, and he was talking about economic decisions, the budget of the British government. And I've got one quote I want you to hear, and then I'll tell you what I think is happening.
Okay, so Rishi Sunak warned of difficult decisions to come as he became the UK's second unelected Prime Minister in 7 weeks on Tuesday, promising to fix the economic mess, which he blamed in part on his predecessor. The former UK Finance Minister, who replaces Liz Truss after a mini-budget that sparked turmoil in financial markets, admitted starkly that mistakes were made by his Conservative Party colleague. He said, quote, I have been elected leader of my party and your Prime Minister in part to fix them, he said, speaking in an address after his appointment by King Charles III.
Okay, so Doc, when you put these two together, the new Prime Minister of Great Britain says there are difficult decisions to make. And what he's referring to is budget cuts. And Doc, when you read the British press, he's going to cut back on the British defense budget. When you read the stories, he is going to cut the British defense budget. You put that together with the Lithuanian commander who says, I'm not sending our howitzers to Ukraine.
We won't have any.
We won't have any. The Western nations are going broke.
They're crumbling now.
They're crumbling. They don't have the money and the weapons to keep sending to Ukraine. And Zelensky can do all the Zoom calls he wants, but there's
And all the shaming he does.
All the shaming, but there's coming a day where he's not going to get any more money, he's not going to get any more tanks, he's not going to get anything. And then they will sit down with Putin and work out the settlement.
Right.
That's where we're headed, because winter's coming, and Europe will not have, not only are they going broke, they will not have energy. And so the settlement hopefully will come this winter without nuclear war, because it's starting to look like some of the countries are realizing this is way too expensive just to keep sending billions of dollars. Now, the United States, we just make up money.
Right.
But there's a day of reckoning coming. And the reckoning that we're experiencing right now is 10% inflation in this country, 8 to 10%. And so for Biden, for him to just to continue spending money that the U.S. government doesn't have, only increases the inflation, which is destroying them. It's going to wipe out the Democrats in November in the election. They're not going to be able to continue to do this. So this war is going to come to an end. Ukraine is going to cease to exist in its present form. Poland will get Western Ukraine. Russia will get Eastern Ukraine. And
there'll be a little enclave of Ukraine around Kiev.
And Zelensky will get a book deal. And life will go on. I think that's where we're headed. I want to skip some, and I want to go down to some politics.
Well, last night was big debate night around the country.
It sure was. And the biggest debate, the most well-published debate, was in the state of Pennsylvania for the U.S. Senate seat. And the contenders are Democrat John Fetterman, who to me looks like Anton LaVey's love child. He is the creepiest person I've ever seen in my lifetime running for public office. He creeps me out. It's just something, Doc, I don't know what. I just, when I look at the guy, he's creepy. He just gives me the heebie-jeebies. Just look at him.
And then he talks.
And then he talks. And look, he had a stroke. And nobody's wishing him ill will. He had a stroke, hope he recovers.
He should be recovering. That's the thing.
He should be home recovering, but the one who can help him recover is Jesus Christ. But he should be home recovering, not running for the U.S. Senate. The last thing we need in Washington is a stroke-stricken senator talking to a senile president.
Right.
Can you imagine that conversation? Fetterman and Biden? Can you imagine what that's going to look like? What that's going to sound like?
It's a struggle enough just to hear either one of them talk by themselves, and so.
Well, here's the, and of course the Republican is Dr. Oz. I'm no fan of Dr. Oz. Mr. Trump is the one who pushed for
Yes.
Dr. Oz. Okay, I'm not a fan of Dr. Oz,
But isn't it strange how everybody loved Dr. Oz until he ran for Senate?
Yeah, because
the media. He was Oprah's pal, and everybody, everybody loved Dr. He was on The View, everywhere. Everybody loved Dr. Oz, and then he ran for Senate.
And then when I started to find out what he believed, I was like, I'm not too crazy about this guy.
Right.
But that's who you got. You got Fetterman or Oz. So you vote for Oz. What else do you do? But the opening remarks, if you didn't see it, watch this. This is the opening remarks from last night's debate between Fetterman and Oz.
With that, let's get started. Mr. Fetterman, we're going to begin with you. Your political experience includes serving as the mayor of Braddock, a small borough near Pittsburgh, and one term as lieutenant governor. You're running for a seat that could decide the balance of power in Washington. What qualifies you to be a U.S. Senator? You have 60 seconds.
Hi, good night, everybody. I'm running to serve Pennsylvania. He's running to use Pennsylvania. Here's a man that spent more than $20 million of his own money to try to buy that seat. I'm also having to talk about something called the Oz rule, that if he's on TV, he's lying. He did that during his career on his TV show. He's done that during his campaign about lying about our record here. And he's also lying probably during this debate. And let's also talk about the elephant in the room. I had a stroke. He's never let me forget that. And I might miss some words during this debate, mush two words together, but it knocked me down, but I'm going to keep coming back up. And this campaign is all about, to me, is about fighting for everyone in Pennsylvania that ever got knocked down, that needs to get back up, and fighting for all forgotten communities all across Pennsylvania that also got knocked down, that needs to get back up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fetterman. Mr. Oz, you are a doctor, a businessman, and television personality. But this is your first run for elected office. What qualifies you to be a U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania? You have 60 seconds.
I'm running for the U.S. Senate because Washington keeps getting it wrong with extreme positions. I want to bring civility, balance, all the things that you want to see, because you've been telling it to me on the campaign trail. And by doing that, we can bring us together in a way that has not been done of late. Democrats, Republicans talking to each other. John Fetterman takes everything to an extreme, and those extreme positions hurt us all. Let's take crime as an example, because it's been such a big problem. Maureen Faulkner accompanied me today to the studio. You know that her husband was a police officer in Philadelphia, was brutally murdered. John Fetterman, during this crime wave, has been trying to get as many murderers convicted and sentenced to life in prison out of jail as possible, including people who are similar to the man who murdered her husband. He does it without with the rest of the parole board agreeing. He's doing it without the families on board. These radical positions extend beyond crime to wanting to legalize all drugs, to open the border, to raising our taxes. I want Washington to be civil again. You need it to be less radical. John Fetterman, unfortunately, would bring that.
Well, Fetterman opened up by saying good night.
Yeah.
That's not a good start.
No.
So, you say goodnight at the end of the debate, okay? So that was the first clue that he was going to have a difficult night. They asked him about fracking, which is a controversial method for extracting energy. And
it employs a lot of Pennsylvanians.
You better believe it.
So it's a big deal.
So he was against fracking, and now during the campaign, he has endorsed fracking. But his answer was so weird. You actually cringed listening to the guy trying to explain it. This is John Fetterman explaining his political position on the topic of fracking.
Mr. Oz, I do want to clarify something. You're saying tonight that you support fracking, that you've always supported fracking, but there is that 2018 interview that you said, quote, I don't support fracking at all. So how do you square the two?
I do support fracking, and I support fracking, and I stand, and I do support fracking.
Just that by itself, should convince a lot of people.
Hey,
but
Doc, he is promoted by the same Democratic Party that put old Joe Biden in the White House.
Yeah.
Okay. They're doing the same thing to him that they did to Biden. They know he's not mentally, physically qualified to be in the U.S. Senate right now.
And yet 40% in a survey today, 40% of the voters thought Fetterman did a great job at the debate last night. You have to watch the whole thing. They had to do a lot of recovery today, his press people. There were some other problems with the prompter and things like that. And that is a whole controversy in itself. He actually had two separate prompters that were gave him the opportunity to be able to see the questions in advance, and to read off Dr. Oz's responses to his questions. Dr. Oz didn't have that opportunity. And so a lot of other issues related to this. And so, but still 40% of Pennsylvanians say, this is our guy. This is this is who we're going with on this.
Well, the other big debate was for governor of New York, and Governor Hochul is running against Congressman Lee Zeldin. Lee Zeldin is the Republican, Governor Hochul the Democrat, and crime is the big issue in the state of New York, because wherever Democrats are ruling, there is rampant crime. And the Democrats have been releasing criminals, just like John Fetterman wants to release murderers and rapists, and you see the same thing happening in California. New York passed what they called bail reform.
Right. It's basically a no bail rule.
Yes, a no bail rule. And so criminals that commit the worst crimes against their victims are out on the street immediately. There's no bail. They're just released, let them go. So here's a clip from last night's debate for the governorship of the state of New York.
I stated that the first day that I'm in office, I'm going to declare a crime emergency and suspend cashless bail and these other pro-criminal laws, because there is a crime emergency. My opponent thinks that right now there's a polio emergency going on, but there's not a crime emergency. Different priorities that I'm hearing from people right now, they're not being represented. From this governor, who still, to this moment, we're halfway through the debate, she still hasn't talked about locking up anyone committing any crimes.
Okay.
Anyone who commits a crime under our laws, especially with the change we made to bail, has consequences. I don't know why that's so important to you. All I know is that we could do more.
I don't know why that's so important to you about locking up criminals. Well, because criminals need to be in jail.
How about the guy that tried to kill him? Congressman Zeldin, a couple months ago, campaigning, and a guy got up on the stage and tried to kill him.
And then just 2 weeks ago, there was a shooting right out in front of his house.
In his house, yes.
Yeah, well, I don't know why, Mr. Zeldin, you're worried about this.
How about the New Yorkers who are pushed in front of subway trains? How about the New Yorkers who are sucker punched in the face when they're walking down the street? She doesn't care.
I don't know why you're worried about that.
The Democrats, you know what? Hey, the Democrats are pro-criminal because the Democrats are criminals. We shouldn't be surprised, Doc. The Democrats are just coming out and being real about themselves. It's a criminal outfit, and they're defending their brethren, the criminals.
Yes.
And so we shouldn't be surprised. They're just being open about who they are. I hope Lee Zeldin wins. He'd be a good governor for the state of New York. And New York has not had a Republican governor for over 20 years. And so I hope Lee Zeldin wins. And the same way...
you know, New York gets a bad rap because most of New York State is rural. Yeah. Most of it is extremely conservative.
It is.
It's just that little section sitting off Manhattan Island there that's causing all the problems for the rest of the state.
Yeah.
And so New York is more than New York City. It's a big state full of conservative people that are worried about these things because the crime doesn't stay in New York City.
Yes. But New York City outvotes them.
Right.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
They outvote them. One more big debate last night, Governor Whitmer versus Tudor Dixon for governor of Michigan. And we've got a clip from that debate.
Now we'll get to the questions. Elle, your first question to Governor Whitmer.
All right. So it seems there are some lingering questions about Proposal 3. If it passes in just a few weeks, how will you legislate if portions of that proposal have to work their way through the courts?
Well, let me start with this. Proposal 3 is absolutely necessary to preserve the rights we've had for 49 years under Roe v. Wade. When the Supreme Court decided to upend it and overrule Roe, Michigan was poised to revert back to a 1931 law that makes abortion a felony. No exceptions for rape or incest, throwing doctors and nurses in jail. The only reason it's not in effect right now is because of my lawsuit. We have an opportunity to enshrine Roe into law by supporting ballot initiative 3. Now, the other side will say all sorts of wild-eyed things that are not true. Parental rights and consent will still be effective. We know that regulations will still be in effect. The simple truth is the way to protect women and ensure that future generations have the same rights we've had for 49 years is by adopting Proposal 3, and I will be a yes vote.
Mrs. Dixon?
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we're not being honest about what Proposal 3 is. The governor has just been dishonest with you in her very first answer. We know that Proposal 3 does remove parental consent. It also makes it so that you don't have to be a doctor to perform an abortion. But it does align with her agenda. Her past, she's voted against a ban on partial birth abortion. And Proposal 3 allows abortion up to the moment of birth for any reason, including sex selection. There will be no legislating around Proposal 3 because it will be language in the Constitution. So we can't put those protections that we've had in place back in place, that we've had in place for all of these years. So when Governor Whitmer tells you that this is going to be Roe, it's not even close to Roe. It's not codifying Roe in our Constitution. But it would be the most radical abortion law in the entire country. The only place that has something similar are China and North Korea.
Governor Whitmer, you have 30 seconds to rebut if you'd like to.
Absolutely. None of what she just said.
Wow.
Yeah, and here's why you can't trust him.
So, well, it just stays in your head.
People are True News fans in Michigan. You've got not only an opportunity, you have a responsibility. You need to get out there and vote against that constitutional amendment that would make Michigan one of the most radical abortion states, not only in America,
in the world.
In the world, on par with North Korea and China. Remember Governor Whitmer, she's the queen of lockdowns. Don't forget about what she did to you in the COVID, the fake COVID crisis that they orchestrated. And like Stacey Abrams, she's an enthusiastic leader of the dead baby Democrats.
And that's all that the Democrats are running on this year.
Dead babies.
That's it. That's all Democrats have.
Dead babies.
And they, whether it's Whitmer, whether it's Abrams, no matter who it is, they can't talk about the economy. They can't talk about inflation. They can't even talk about Ukraine. They won't. If they talk about Ukraine, like the progressive Democrats said, if they say anything about Ukraine, they get shut down.
Yeah, in 24 hours.
Yeah, and so the only thing that the Democrats are running on this year is dead babies. That's it.
I don't think it's because they can't talk about other topics. It's the topic they want to talk about. They love killing babies. Doc, they love it.
They love it so much they want to put it into law.
It's a religion. Beyond law, they're putting it into the Constitution of Michigan. That's a constitutional amendment. When Tudor Dixon said if that Amendment 3 passes, there's no legislation that we can work around it. Meaning, it's a constitutional amendment. California did it. Okay, so they are codifying baby killing into the Constitution, saying this is a constitutional right to murder babies. That's how Wicked Whitmer. That's her name, Wicked Whitmer. If you live in Michigan, you have more than an opportunity, you have a responsibility to vote and remove her from office. We got a lot more I'd like to talk about, but we'll save it for tomorrow. As always, we thank you for being here and supporting us, and we encourage you to tell your friends